Today, we are joined by producer and engineer Ben Rice.
When I think about it and I have to articulate it, it feels really bizarre because I walk in and it still feels totally new to me every day.
And they were like, where did you get those harmonies from? Don't worry about it.
You're in it for life now. It's there.
Yeah.
It's there. It's not going anywhere.
You're like, Steve, what are you doing here?
Well, you did this to yourself, Ben.
Yep.
Make it work.
I want to record. I want to produce. I want to do that stuff. What was that shift for you?
I think I've...
This episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast is brought to you by Bliss. Bliss is a French audio developer focusing on developing creative and intuitive synths and effects. They developed over 25 different plugins for Windows, Mac, and iOS for all of my iPhone and iPad producers. You can discover plugins such as the Bliss Monolith, which is a mono synth they have for free, as well as the Bliss Arpeggiator, Bliss Megalith Wavetable Synthesizer, or Bliss Voices, the ultimate vocal harmonizer. Go to bliss.com, that's BLEASS.com, and use the promo code HOMESTUDIOHANGOUT, all one word, to save 20% off of your next order. Thank you to Bliss for sponsoring this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast. Now, let's get back to the conversation. And welcome back to the Home Studio Hangout podcast. I am your host, Drew, here with my co-host, Josh. Josh, good to see you again.
Likewise, man.
It's been a couple episodes, I think, since you've been on at this point.
It has been.
Hey, when you're moving, you get busy.
Yes, sir.
So, but today we are joined by producer and engineer based in Brooklyn, Ben Rice. Ben, I'm super stoked to have you here with us today. Talk shop, hang out for a bit.
Here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, man. And if that name sounds familiar to the listeners, you may have heard Ben's name from our episode with Harper James, who, Ben, you and Harper work out of Degraw together, correct?
Yeah, we're based in Brooklyn. We got a couple rooms up here, and I'm in the A room, Harper's in the B room, and we've been going at it probably for about 12 years here now. That's crazy.
That's awesome.
That's crazy that you've been in Brooklyn for 12 years as a music studio. That's a lot of them don't last like that, especially in those areas, in those larger cities.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
When I think about it and I have to articulate it, it feels really bizarre because I walk in and it still feels totally new to me every day. I walk into the studio, I'm like, there's a console here. This is insane. And wow, I get to make a record here today. So it still feels brand new to me.
Yeah.
And then I look at what year it is on when I'm naming the file, and I'm like, wait, it's 2024. We started this back in 2012, so it's a real blessing.
That's nutty.
Wow.
Thanks,
that's so
man.
sick. That makes me really happy for you.
Yeah, man. And you don't see a lot of people, especially in the modern day, in larger areas, being able to start good, solid recording studios and then it lasts for 10 plus years. You know what I'm saying? That's not really in the market anymore. And that's pretty wild that you're able to consistently do that. And that you and Harper are both able to, make it.
I think that so I grew up in Brooklyn, and so I had a decent network of, musical friends and bands and artists that I knew from playing in bands. So I had that, working, in my favor, because there definitely is the side of it where it's the studio is not necessarily the thing that if you build it, they will come. And, for whatever reason, I guess we can get into it if you want, but I thought it was a good idea to build a studio. I still don't know if it was, but I did it. and I'm here and I've got a lot of stuff here and it would be a real pain to move it. So I'm in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that
yeah,
I had worked under some other producers and they all were don't open a commercial studio. Don't do it. If you want to be a producer, just work with cool artists, and you got to learn your own lessons. So I didn't listen to them, and I did it anyway. But I would say the first 7 years were kind of this really ambiguous period in my professional world where it was like, is this a studio that you can rent by the day? And some of it was that, and then some of it was projects that I was producing, and some of it was like renting it out to other engineers and producers that I knew. And then kind of like over the past like 5 years, it's been this shift towards being like, at this point in my life, I need to just like work on projects that I, really connect with and that I believe in, and shifting towards doing like the stuff that I'm producing, and then Harper having his own space where he's working on the stuff that he's producing. It's been a really good way to be able to maintain a space together, but be able to work on stuff that feels creatively fulfilling.
It's really cool because Josh has been up to visit me some recently, and I have a space here that I work out of, and that space has been there for 25 years. And in South Carolina, that is insane that he has been there for 25 years as a recording studio. And like he's been there, and he said like a big part of it has been just like you can never have the they're just going to show up mindset. Like you have to that does not work, especially nowadays. Like that has gotten less and less. But he said another big aspect of it was having he has 4 engineers that work out of that space. I think 5 now, because he just added an Atmos
Cool.
room. So he's got a guy that just works in that room. And so he's got me, my friend Jesse, who will have been on the podcast by the time this airs. He runs and produces, the Atmos guy, and then another guy that all like bring projects in, or he'll bring in to help make projects faster or things like that. And we all feel like we have a good space to work out of if we need it. And like that keeps he was saying that attributes to a lot of the consistency that kind of happens across the board, and not being afraid to be like, oh, this is my space, only my projects can work out of this location.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Not being
Yeah,
so
I mean, I
closed
feel
off
like
about
I've
it.
gone through like different phases of that, and like there were the phases where like that really made sense. Like I think that at one time before the pandemic, there were between like 4 and 5, of my friends that were working out of here pretty consistently. I had an assistant at that point who was amazing, and he was bringing some of his stuff to work on and helping me with the stuff that I was working on. And then I guess that like through the pandemic, I just like got really used to like working solo, and like the nature of the stuff that I was doing kind of shifted. But I feel like, with all of this stuff, it's like there's the ebb and flow where, like now I'm getting called, like we were talking about before we started recording, go down to Nashville more. So it's like, if I'm going to Nashville, somebody could be working here and doing something and utilizing the space. So I think it's just always being like open to like finding like those, ways that you can collaborate and utilize, the resources that you have collectively.
Yeah, 100%. Well, so Ben, I would love to kind of get into maybe like how you got into this whole like music production thing to begin with. You said you're based in Brooklyn, and you were from Brooklyn originally?
Yeah, I got born and raised in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
and I couldn't leave it.
Yeah. It got you.
It
Got
got
you. It
me.
locked you in.
It got me. Yeah, I
Were
couldn't
you
give
a
up the
part
New
of
York pizza.
Were you a part of the scene back then as well, like as you were coming up the whole time? Or because I think Harper said that he wasn't quite as much, and then he left and kind of came back and everything had changed. But you said you've kind of been there the whole time. Were you a little bit more a part of like or at least aware of the music scene in Brooklyn as it was as you were kind of coming up?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I kind of got the wave of like the early 2000s, like indie
Mm-hmm.
rock renaissance in the Lower East Side, and then like things kind of shifting out to Brooklyn. So I was very, very fortunate in that regard, because it was an inspiring time to be in New York City. And, I think that I was like in high school during that period. So my high school band, we'd be out like putting up flyers on lampposts and trying to, standing outside like Mercury Lounge or Bowery Ballroom.
Yeah.
And like, as people are like filtering out after seeing like Interpol or Long Wave or whatever, being like, hey, come check out my band. And, there was definitely an amazing energy in the city. And it kind of felt like, like our version of the Beatles, like seeing like the
Yeah.
Strokes and Interpol and, you know, those kind of bands coming up.
100%.
I've heard that from multiple people where, you know, the wave of different forms of rock music in like the late 90s, early 2000s kind of felt almost like a otherworldly thing in New York specifically. And I don't know, so it's cool hearing you say that too. Do you feel like that has changed quite a bit as far as all of it?
I would say yes. It has all changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think.
What was the
Go ahead.
biggest? I was going to say, what have you seen as like the biggest shift, like away from a genre or more, like shift in genres, or the music scene kind of going away completely, or what?
Well, I don't want to say that the music scene has gone away completely, especially because, you know, I've gotten older. So like I'm not, you know, like when you're 16 or 17 years old and you're like, you know, going out every night, like you're on the forefront of, you know, culture.
Yeah.
And, you know, I kind of had this front row seat because we were playing the clubs and all the bookers like knew us. So they knew that like they could trust us that if we came in, we weren't going to drink. And that kind of, that was like the trade-off where we're like, if we behave ourselves, we get to see these amazing shows happening. And, you know, in my book, like that was 110% worth it. So I think that like, you know, being a kid and getting access to that, like you're on the front lines of culture and then kind of seeing the scene start to come out in Brooklyn and, you know, whether it was Yeah Yeah Yeahs and then MGMT and stuff like that. And I think that like New York City's gotten more expensive. You know, a lot of the places and the buildings where like the venues were have gotten torn down. So, you know, when I walk around those areas, it's a little bit like, I don't know if you know the feeling of like where you're in a dream and you're like, there are certain elements where you're like, this is factually how it is, but then there's all these like other buildings that are juxtaposed in there. It's a little bit of that feeling. So I think that has affected the scene. I think that they're the people who are the lifers here who are really, you know, they're just in it for the long haul and like they can't be pulled away from the city. But, you know, I think that there's definitely like newer acts that are coming out of the city, but it's not the same thing. And I think that part of that is also just like where I'm at in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's like you brought up that things are getting more expensive. Like it's definitely a lot harder to like pursue art, you know, if things are way more expensive, you know? And, so yeah, I mean, I could definitely see how that is a major factor in all that. But it's really cool, like seeing how much is still happening in New York, you know, especially because it feels like, right around that time period, like everybody was like moving to LA, and that's like whenever LA really became like the spot to be for music. And it's really cool. I feel like every other day now, like I'll open up Instagram and one of my recommended people to follow is like another producer and mixer that's in New York. And I don't know, I've always been fascinated by the city. I haven't been since I was a little kid, and so we want to go back for
Come hang out
next year. I would love to, because it seems very sick.
Yeah.
And
it's very specific. I feel like there's no other place like it
right
in the country.
Exactly.
Really.
So
there's nothing like it in the world. And, you know, I might be biased, but I think that it's the kind of place that even if you don't want to live here like full time, there is this incredible energy that you can tap into. Like if you come here and, you know, make some music, make some art. And that's something that I've experienced like with a lot of the artists that I work with, you know, who will come in from out of town, whether it's, you know, LA or Nashville or like, you know, there's an artist I work with that came in from Vermont and Texas. And like, you know, you get into like this flow of what is it to be in this city. And there's all the different like narratives and stories that people have heard of like creativity in New York City. And you can kind of tap into a bit of that and then let that fuel whatever it is that you're making. So I think it's a really powerful place to get to make records.
I can definitely see that.
Yeah,
Could
100%.
definitely see that. And
I feel that even in the like in the comedy scene there, I feel like is a very similar aspect,
Yeah.
like the comedy scene there is so strong, and I feel like everybody that goes there because of they talk about like, the energy of it, the roughness of it, but like coming out on top is like such an achievement in that world. I feel like in the music scene, it's probably very similar to that as well.
100%. I mean, it's funny. Like, I don't really know much about the comedy world, but what I have observed is that a lot of the venues that are like around the area where my studio is have
Yeah.
shifted to doing a lot more comedy over the past few years. So clearly, there is like some sort of like groundswell in this area of
Hmm.
comedians, and there definitely is a scene. I just don't know
comedy,
it.
yeah, comedy is getting huge
Yeah.
again, which is really, really exciting. And like we religiously watch like Kill Tony, which is a terrible show at heart, but it's also really, really cool. And if you don't know what that show
I
is,
don't know it.
basically a bunch of people sign up to do a minute long set, and Tony Hinchcliffe, who's a comedian, is sitting on this panel, and then they like roast you or interview you and like purposely try to embarrass you, and like it gets pretty brutal.
It's basically those roast shows, except the panel could be like anybody. Like
Anybody.
name massive comedian could be that person.
Or it could be Post Malone, or
Yeah.
dude, they somehow got Tucker Carlson on the show.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
I
as part of the panel. It's
I was ready
so
to
random.
not watch it because I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm gonna hate him, and he was actually kind of funny. I'm not gonna lie.
And they're all just
Wow.
roasting these comedians that are coming up to do these 1 minute spots. So they'll come up. Sometimes they'll kill and they'll be like, "Oh, that was awesome."
Yeah, that
and then they'll
happened
like
this
riff back and forth. But then, yeah, a lot of times they'll just destroy them.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because they'll have all kinds of different guests on, and a lot of the guys are from New York, and
Yeah, a ton of them are from New
it's
York.
interesting like seeing the differences. It's no different than music, It's like these people who come up, around this form of art in this area all have certain preferences or quirks, and it's very cool. But yeah, comedy's sick, man.
Yeah.
That's cool. I gotta check that out.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good time. Well, so maybe shifting into, we kind of talked about your coming up in Brooklyn. How did you get from like playing in bands, doing the thing, putting up flyers, all that into I want to record, I want to produce, I want to do that stuff? What was that shift for you?
I think I've always been interested in recording. Like, I mean, I remember like as a kid, like having like a little like Fisher Price, like, recorder with the microphone on a little cord, and like recording my brother, like my younger brother, like just banging on a drum. And then, I remember getting like a Tascam, 4-track, and figuring out that I could bounce five, tracks from that to like a mini disc player and then back to get more. And just like, I think that I always had a bit of like, just a knack to do it, or like the will to do it and to experiment with it. And then when I guess I was like 13 or 14, and like I made like a demo, and then I was like selling my demo CDs to like kids in my school, and one of the kids like played it for her mom, and then she like passed it on to a friend of hers who was a producer, and he was like, oh, this is cool, like let's meet. And it was a producer named Roger Greenwald, and he had done a band called Radish. It was like a band in the 90s that kind of blew up and got like, one of those, like maybe like the last like major record deal. And he was
Yeah.
like, we're going to do that for you. Like, and I was like, all right, cool. Like that would be sick. And spoiler alert, didn't happen. But, I got to like kind of watch what he was doing and learn a bit about like what the whole process was, and, get my songs like ripped apart. And then I was able to like kind of take that and be like, well, I actually don't want to do this solo. I want to do this with like my people. I want to have like a crew. I want to have a band. And then that shifted towards like really, really being focused on how do I get a band together to like work on this with. And simultaneously, my high school music teacher got me a summer, job at a recording studio, cleaning toilets and, making coffee and running, errands. And they would trust me to do stuff that, like, looking back on it, I'm like, that is crazy that I was like trusted to like run like a master tape like across, New York City like by foot,
wow.
as like a 16-year-old. But I guess it was fine because I got it there. But it was kind of a real. It was at a big studio called Clinton Recording Studios, which was like maybe like one of like those last, big studios in New York City. Like not, I don't know if it was as big as Avatar, but they did like the Macy's like 4th of July like fireworks there, and like they do the whole score. And
Wow.
The year before I worked there, they had done like a Dylan record there, Love and Theft, which I was really bummed that I missed because I love Dylan. But it was a really good like introduction, even if I wasn't engineering, but I got to be around engineers and like see how things worked and listen to how they talked about things and learn some of the names. So then my band, kind of jumping around, but then my band, we got hooked up with a producer named Gus Van Gogh, who worked with us and did a couple of EPs, and he also very graciously took me under his wing and showed me, a ton of stuff as far as like songwriting, song structure, arrangement, how to like really grill drummers and, make them hate you, but then also love you for simplifying what they're playing. And, I feel like I got very lucky with that, where I learned from some really good people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it seems like you were pretty young whenever all of this was going on too.
Yeah, I'd say like 14 to 19.
Wow, that's
Dang.
awesome. That's really sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. So,
Yeah.
by the time I was 20, I'd been around it for like 6 years.
Yeah, so
And
it's not even like there was really much of a question on what you wanted to do. Like you were already kind of doing it.
yeah, and the thing is like I was already doing it, and I feel like that just kind of continued because it wasn't ever like a choice of like, oh yeah, like I want to be a producer. It was just like once I learned how to do some of these things, then my friends started asking me because they were like, well, how come your songs work and our songs aren't working like that? And I was like, oh, well, it's simple. You just do blah, blah, blah. And not that I'm not saying it's simple to like have, really good songs. And I'm not even saying
Sure.
that those songs that were that great, but they functioned in a way that, my friends were realizing that their songs weren't functioning. And then I got to just do the same thing that like Gus was doing for me, for my friends. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, wait, I guess that's producing.
Yeah.
Right. And here I am,
That's so
still
sick.
still doing it.
That is
Yeah.
so sick. So, at what point did you decide that you were going to open up your studio?
Um, so my band got a record deal. Shortest version of a long story. My band got a record deal. It was a terrible experience, as they often are.
Yeah.
And in the process of being in limbo with the record label, I realized that I could convert our rehearsal space, which was in my parents' basement, into like a little home studio. And my parents were gracious enough to let me do that. And I got like a 002 and Pro Tools LE,
Yeah.
and I had a Mackie, and I started making records with that.
Nice.
And I was, I was involved in bands still, started playing with some other people. And then, by the time, I guess 5 or 6 years later, any money that I made, I just saved or put into gear. And then at a certain point, I was like, you know what? Like things aren't really evolving with the bands the way I was hoping that they would.
Mhm.
And there was enough work for me, like in the studio world, that I was like, I'm going to do this crazy thing of building a studio and opening a studio. And like I was saying to you earlier, like I didn't listen to any of the advice that I was given by, Gus, his production partner, Werner, they're like, don't open a commercial studio. Don't do it. And I did it anyway. And, I live to tell the tale thus far.
Wow, yeah. So whenever you were building out your spot, like, how much of it did you do yourself? I'm assuming quite a bit.
I'm sad to say, like, very little.
Oh, really? Well, okay. So the reason behind that question is because no, it's fine. I was really curious about like whenever you take on like this huge project, what I always hear is how much of a pain in the ass it is, and I was hoping. It's
terrible.
Yeah, and so I was really curious about how much heartbreak happened while you were making the spot.
Building it. Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot, man. I hope to never have to do it again.
That's why you're not moving. That's why you stayed in Brooklyn.
Yeah. You're in it for life now. It's there. It's there. It's not going anywhere.
No, I got really lucky, man. I mean, I've been looking for a space for a few years, and the area that I'm in, which is like kind of like a real estate agent would tell you it was Park Slope. Technically, it's really Gowanus, but I had seen the space, and it stayed on the market for like a year, and it was something that I found just kind of like walking around Brooklyn, because I was like, I don't know how to find a space. Like, let me just walk around and like look at signs for rent. And I did that in all of the areas that I was like interested in opening a studio. And at that point, like, Gowanus hadn't become what it is now, where there's like, now there's like high rises where there used to be factories, and there's like a ton of great restaurants and coffee shops and breweries. It was not that. Mm-hmm. And I knew the place had been like sitting on the market for a year. So I offered the landlord like a really low number, and he said yes. And I asked for a really long lease, and he said yes. And, I got lucky, and I hired some people to help me build it, and, went into a lot of debt, and, opened the place with like, I think that when I opened the studio, I had like $800 left, maybe like a little over $800 left.
Let's go.
Yeah. And it was like, well, you did this to yourself, Ben.
Yep.
Make it work.
Yeah, make it work. Figure it out.
Yeah.
That's so sick. Those early days, you were talking about how you were just kind of going through different iterations of, like, is this like book it by the day? Is this like, all these different ways that recording studios operate. Like, do you think that, like, looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently? Or do you feel like it was good to kind of try everything and like figure out what works?
It's so hard to say. There are definitely days where, I look back and I'm like, man, I should have listened to like Gus and, not built like, full on studio. I could have like done like a production room, and I wouldn't have like the overhead and the stress and like all of that. But at the same time, it's like, well, I've got a studio, and I can like have a band set up here, and like, we can make like real records. Yeah. And like, I should contextualize real. We can make records where like people can like sit around and like play together. And it's also, I've got it at this point set up where I can like be in here just like producing stuff where I'm playing everything, and it's all like wired in. So it's given me a lot of flexibility, and I think that that's led to opportunities that I probably wouldn't have gotten if I wasn't set up for them.
Yeah. So
I think that sometimes it really is a matter of just like betting on yourself, whether you're totally conscious of it or not. I think it is like the betting on yourself and like, if you really mean it and you like need to be here, like making music, making records, I think that you will find a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Well, it's really interesting to me because like I've been thinking a lot about like what my long-term goals are, and obviously that includes like a place to work and like what's that going to look like. And it's like there's a trade-off for everything, but I think with you being in a spot where like you could do almost anything is really freeing in a way, because then you don't have to worry about what kind of projects you book. There's a lot less as far as logistics go. If you're booking this kind of project, you won't have to rent out a second space and things like that. And I feel like that probably makes it a lot easier to just be able to dive into projects.
100%. Yeah. And I like a lot of different kinds of music. Mm-hmm. I like to work on a lot of different things. I would say that like the most important thing to me is like the vocalist, and do I believe them? If I believe the vocalist and I can get behind it, then like whatever the aesthetic is, it's like we can do that.
Yeah.
So I think that like you were saying, like just having like everything like ready to go where we can pivot really easily has definitely been an advantage as far as like the logistics of making records.
Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And it's cool that you brought that up too, because like that's really what it is for me. It's like I just want to like understand what the vocalist is getting across, and I want to feel it, and then from there it's like, okay, now we can produce the song.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's always a challenge thinking about that, and like trying to predict what might come up, and it's like, oh, what should I get so I can make sure that I'm always prepared.
Yeah.
But that's super sick. So in your spot, do you just have like, you've said it a couple of times now where you said that you have everything like wired in and ready to go. Do you typically just have everything patched in already?
I would say for the most part, yeah. I leave mics up on the kit. I've got piano mic'd up. I always have like guitar, at least one guitar amp like ready to go where I can just flip it on. In the control room, I've got a couple keyboards that I always keep next to me that I tend to use the most if I'm like working on something where I'm playing and producing it. Mm-hmm. So I can kind of just be like ready to go within, 5 minutes on anything. Cause I don't really I try not to like break the flow, and I try not to have like the artist like sitting around. So if we have a specific project coming in, like I'll do all of the prep and the setup before they get here. I don't want to do that on their time. And that was something, whether I was like doing it as like a commercial studio or a project that I'm producing, that's something that I'm really religious about, because I think it can really kill the energy of the day.
Yeah.
Like when I have a band coming in from out of town to do a record, or like if we're like, going to lock in for a few weeks or whatever it is, I'll say like, let's get together like the day before and just like take the evening to get set up and hang and just like kind of get them comfortable in the space, so that when they walk in for day one of like actually making the record, they already feel like it's a bit of their space,
Yeah.
I had a question on you have one really interesting credit on they have a couple really interesting credits on your website, but I wanted
one
to
interesting credit in 2 decades. That's how I feel.
I feel like you have there's this interesting credit. There's a Meghan Trainor record that it says you engineered and you play guitar on. I would love to hear the story of how that came about, because I feel like that's not a record type that you would just fall into based on like also the rest of your your discography and like getting to play guitar on it as well. Like that's really interesting. So I would just love to hear like the story around that for you.
Yeah. So that's a record that a good buddy of mine, Joan Stone, wrote and produced on, I don't know how many of the tunes, but I would say a lot.
Yeah.
He's an amazing writer and producer out in LA, but he came up in New York with me, and he was like one of the guys who was like in the fold here in the studio when I opened it. One of the pieces, then here's my tangent.
Sure.
One of the pieces of advice that I was given when I opened the studio is have a B room. It'll help a lot. You'll have the cross pollination of, having different people come in and out. And also you'll have somebody that can like help cover the overhead of having a studio. So that was like the one piece of advice that I got that I actually listened to, and it has served me really well. But Gian was like a buddy of mine where we came up together playing in bands, and I had worked with him on like some of his band stuff, like in my parents' basement, producing for them, and working on his solo records. And he kind of just jumped in. He was like, yeah, like I'm down to go in and like get a room and try to make it as a producer. And his sensibility has always been kind of geared towards doing, that kind of pop music, whether it's, Meghan Trainor or Jonas Brothers, like, and he's got a very diverse like palette, but I think that he also really like gets like just fundamentally and intuitively how to make those kind of records. And he was here for, I guess, 2012 through 2016, and then got a gig out in LA and moved out there. But, as we've always done, like we've always like kind of collaborated on projects. So when he needs some stuff that's going to feel like kind of, I guess, organic or like rocky or soul-y, like he'll send stuff over to me and I'll get to track on it. So that kind of led to some of those kind of credits that you might see there.
Yeah.
But I think the guitar stuff, I think I was in Spain actually when I did that, and he sent me some tracks, and I was working on a record there and just went into the studio early and like banged out a few guitars. And then Gian was like, hey, can we get some drums? So a good buddy of mine who's like an amazing drummer, Greg Wazorek, who's like played with Nora Jones and Valerie June and the Autumn Defense, and does a lot of session stuff for me. Like we got him in to play some drums on that stuff too.
That's really sick.
Yeah.
Dude, that's super cool. And like, yeah, what an interesting thing that you had a B room, had somebody in, and it's wild that he went that direction. You know what I mean? And like, but it's cool to like, it's a testament to keeping, like having friends and keeping your connections strong with people, and like, just like being friends with people in the industry outside of what they can do for you is just fun, but you also never know what can come of anything of anybody that you meet.
110%. And I mean, I feel like on a certain level, like Gian and I are doing the same thing that we were doing forever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like where it was like, like he would have a project of an artist that like, maybe nobody or like 3 people had heard of. And he'd be like, hey, can you like put some like guitar on this? And I would have, and he's also, to his credit, he's a great session drummer too. And I used to have him play like session drums on stuff for me, like when he was in New York before he moved out to LA. And it was always just like, hey, can I get you on this track? Can I get you on this track? And it just so happened that like, the tracks got a little bit more well known.
Yeah. It's the level of notoriety just continuously lifted with both of you on that level.
Yeah, but it's the same. It's the same thing, man. It's just it really is just a hang and like trying to like collaborate with like people that you really love and respect.
Cool people making dope music and just doing it together.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it's all about, really. Like even in sessions with like me and Josh have worked in sessions together where we've either co-written or co-produced or in whatever kind of scenario, and it's like just hanging out with the homies.
100%.
And the one song that we did together is still one of my favorite songs that I've ever worked on.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. I think that a lot of people like overcomplicate, how to do cool stuff in music. And it really just comes down to that. It's just make friends and have fun and do good work, and everything will just kind of build,
And don't think about what it could be or any of the technicalities of it, like living in the moment of, hey, we're having a great time and we're making this dope music, and let's make that the best it can be and make the time we're having the best it can be.
Yeah.
And then once the music's done, we'll figure out the logistics of everything else after the fact. But but we'll let it work itself out. But in the moment, like not thinking about, well, we gotta make this, fit this kind of thing, or let's like serve the song as it is, and not necessarily try to push it in or corner in any kind of specific direction, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think that the more that we can just focus on the things that we do have control of, which is like how we're responding to the music that's coming through the speakers, and surrounding ourselves with people that are like really, that we really feel passionately about collaborating with, the better art that we're going to make. And I think that that's, I would say that like all of the people that I know who I would consider like friends in the music world, and everybody's like really passionate about making great art. And I think that sometimes, from the outsider's perspective, people can think about it and like be like somewhat jaded about it, where they're looking at like, oh, it's so easy to do. Like, if I wanted to do, insert X, and they don't really understand how passionate and how sincere people are when they're creating records, and how much like all the producers and engineers that I know really are there to serve the artists that they're working with.
Yeah. I heard this story about how Party in the USA by Miley Cyrus, the person who wrote it because of like some awful experience that they had.
Whoa.
And like, so like that song came from a very sincere and like vulnerable place. And it's almost like whenever you make meaningful art, like people want to listen to it.
Yeah.
And like
right?
I think a lot of people like kind of oversimplify music in like one way or another, especially like I see it a lot like with like the average white person whenever they look at hip hop, and it's like you don't quite get it, like there's a lot that goes into every single genre, and I think it's important to dive into that and explore it and really figure it out, because I've been guilty of that in the past, whether it was making metal records or trying to make pop music or whatever, where if at any point you're like just trying to boil it down to a like a blueprint or anything like that, it's very quickly it can turn a really good idea into something just absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, I mean, how many tutorials are there out there on like, well, if you want to make pop music, like then this is the structure. All of the best songs in the world have like this, this same common thing where your melody's got to be AABA or AABC, and if you don't do that, your song's not. And it's like I don't know, maybe. But no, like I've never been in like a session like once with like a writer or an artist that like I'm working with and had that come up. Like that's never been a conversation.
Yeah.
Like the conversations are so much like more personal and deeper than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like the people that generally talk in those kind of absolutes are the people that have actually never made a like a true heartfelt record.
Yeah,
because they've attempted to systematize everything down to where now it's soulless and it feels very bland.
Yeah. I think that trying to have a system for things and figure out the formula, you wind up boxing yourself in very quickly, and I'm really not a fan of that.
100%.
I would say I come into every day, every session, like just as open and, with as much like child mind as I can possibly have. Yeah. Because I know that like the other stuff that I've accumulated as far as like thinking about stuff technically, it's still there. Like it's not, it's not going anyplace, but the more that I can come at it from like the place of like, wow, like I'm a kid and I get to do this, the better it feels.
Yeah. And I think that that's really all it comes down to is just, what feels best, You know, I had in December, I worked on my first project with a label involved, and we came in late into the process. So we were doing like 4 songs in 6 days. We had good demos for all of them. And the problem was, though, is the rest of the album was done. Like, they basically just came to us because, like, the budget for the record has basically been spent at this point. There were 2 other producers involved with the other songs, and, like, they needed more singles. And so the band was like, well, we know this guy, and then his friend, Josh, they've been working together, and they do cool stuff. And so somehow we were allowed to work on this. And I remember, like, the first day we were just listening and, like, getting things set up and, you know, doing all the tedious stuff and just talking and getting to know each other and, like, figure out, you know, where we should be at, like, artistically. And I remember the one dude who, like, writes everything for the band, he's, like, losing his mind. he's like, I don't understand, like, how, like, we're supposed to make this work, because, like, the songs that I wrote for this don't sound anything like the rest of the album, and then, like, we're gonna have to make the songs really bad to make them fit with the album, and then, like, you know, everybody has, like, different opinions on this matter at hand, and me and Lee were just like, calm down, like, we are going to work on these songs, and we're only gonna worry about that song. That's the only thing that we're gonna worry about, and then we're gonna send that song out knowing it's the best that all of us have, and then we're going to see what, you know, your A&R manager think. And we had very few notes. It was, and honestly, the only notes
and
that
you got
we
a
got,
great feature.
Yeah, we got a killer feature. That was cool. But, like, the only notes that we got legitimately, in my opinion, made the songs better. You know, and I think that it was because when I listened to those songs, like, it feels like to me that we were all sitting in a room going, but how can we make this better? You know, what feels the best? And there were a lot of conversations about, like, taking these songs out on tour and, like, how is this going to feel in a live context? And, like, I feel like we did a pretty good job on it. And, you know, it was really eye-opening to me because you hear the elders talking about that all the time, where it's like, it's not about, you know, arrangement as much as people think it is, or it's not about this or that. It's really just about how the songs feel. And, like, so sitting down day one and, like, having that conversation and then watching it play out in, like, real time was probably the coolest learning experience that I think I've had yet. So
working with bands is always a really great learning experience.
Yeah, it's also a ton of fun.
Yeah.
And shout out to Josh. They got Bert from the Used on that as the feature, and that was really cool.
That was
wow.
Then it made it to Octane Radio. So that's awesome. Shout out to Josh and Lee for killing that track.
Yeah.
Amazing. Congrats.
On his first label project too. I'm, like, very proud as, like, a friend. Like, they killed it.
I also said I was never going to work on radio rock songs ever.
And now I did.
I want to hear it.
It's called You're So Ugly When You Cry by The Funeral Portrait. I'll send it to you.
Please do. I want to hear it.
It's a really good song. Honestly, the craziest thing about it, there's very little known about it, but that song, the reason why Bert got on it from the Used is because somehow John Feldman heard the record and really liked it, and, like, apparently hit up Bert and got him to do the feature and, like, recorded him on it. And
wow.
So, like, they called us and they're like, yo, you won't believe this. John Feldman heard that record. And I was like, whoa. Like, he was, like, my idol in high school, you know, like, he's, like, one of the people that made me want to make records. And
yeah,
that's cool.
Then I was talking to Lee. I was like, 100%, like, he's going to end up reproducing the whole song. And I won't even be mad about it because, like, it's John Feldman. Like, that's pretty sick. You know? And he didn't touch anything on it. He just made the song better with the feature. And that was, like, so cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, that was also another really cool learning experience, was just hearing how a few extra tracks of, like, vocals can make a song sound so much bigger. And like listening back to like the version that we sent out and then listening to the version that we got back with the feature, it's just massive. It's so much bigger. And all it is just a little bit of vocal arrangement. And it's one of those things where you hear it and you're like, why didn't I think of that? You know?
Yeah.
But that was really cool because, you know, there's decades of songs in between me and somebody like John Feldman. So it was cool, you know, trying to get inside his head a little bit. It's like, oh, so that's what he heard whenever he listened to it.
Yeah, that's always got to be really interesting. And Ben, maybe when you were coming up, you could speak to this, is like hearing, like working with people, you know, a couple steps ahead of you, or, you know, a couple rungs up the ladder from you, and that are working on these different kinds of records, or, you know, larger by the scale of the industry records. And then picking apart their brain and being like, why in the world did you think of these weird specific things, but they worked so well, you know? Did you have a couple of those instances that really like stand out to you kind of across your time as a engineer producer? Maybe things that you've learned from some other people that have like really stood out?
It's a good question. I don't know that I don't recall like any conversations that I had with like, you know, any of the people that were mentoring me, like Gus Van Gogh, I'd say was one. Eddie Kramer was another one that I got to do some stuff with when I was coming up, that I wasn't really asking them questions as far as like picking things apart. I would say that the things that I took away were more just like their ability to zoom out and watching them interact with the music, watching them interact with us as a band, and then trying to think about like what it's like to be in like their shoes as far as like making some of those decisions. But I don't know that like I never really did, like we didn't ever like sit down and be like, okay, like let's dissect like what
Sure.
you know Led Zeppelin 2.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, there's probably part of me that wanted to, but I was also
sure.
like, you know,
Time and place.
Yeah.
100%. No, I guess I more so meant like just things that you osmosis picked up from those scenarios. But yeah, that's a great example of like being able to step back and place yourself in the realm of the record as a whole.
Yeah.
And like, how does this feel in context to the record? Because sometimes I feel like us being in such a singles minded industry right now, like a lot of people that are going to come up as new producers and engineers are going to very much sit in the singles thing. And the first time they have to do a record, being able to do that contextual thinking is actually really hard.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that could be applied to like the zoom out on a single as well.
Yes.
Just as far as like, you know, even if you're only doing one track, just what does it mean to like give everybody in the band, you know, the space to come to like how they feel about it. I would say that that's actually like a really big one where I've observed, and I think that I've taken it to heart and put it into practice to the best of my abilities, is just giving people the space to like come to like the conclusions that they need to come to about how they feel about the music. And I think that that's something that like, you know, you're in a session, the more important it is, the more like, you know, nerves are heightened, and, you know, there can be like the instinct to be like, oh, I've got to jump in and say something. And it's like, sometimes you can just say nothing and let there be silence in the room, and then, you know, give the space for somebody who might not be like the type A person in the band to speak up and figure out like, how can you encourage that? And how can you get everybody talking? And because I think that like the more that you can get everybody talking, the more that you lead to situations where you can have these songs that really connect and that everybody feels proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably one of the most challenging things that I've dealt with. Is I've worked with a few artists who, it's incredibly difficult for them to give you any form of an opinion on what you're working on. And I've realized that like I really don't want to work with those kinds of artists going forward. You know, I'd very much rather somebody tell me that they hate everything that they just heard play out of the speakers than, you know, someone who just kind of like shakes their head yes at everything that I do. Because I think the conversations about, you know, everybody's intentions and visions for a record are really what make it special.
What do you do in a situation like that, where you feel like the artist is just saying, like, yeah, like, I dig everything. It's fine. It's good.
I try to challenge them. And I'm like, well, you know, what are you most excited about right now? You know, what gets you excited? What are you thinking for this part? What, you know, and, you know, because I've worked with quite a few artists where I'm writing a lot of the music too. And I just don't think that that's for me anymore. I'm not very interested in what I have to say. You know,
Interesting.
I'm much more interested in what other people have to say.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that that's ultimately what makes an artist extremely believable and moving, is whenever they have a lot of opinions about the work at hand.
Yeah, I mean, I've found that sometimes there are ways that artists will express their opinions, even if they're saying that they like something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it's body language, you know, sometimes saying they like it, but not necessarily being ready to move on. Sometimes it's saying they like it and leaving the room. You know, so I try to get to know the artist and like their preferences and just like how they think about, you know, really just how they view the world, how they think about like life, how they think about like, you know, the stuff that they're really passionate about, like find out like what's turning them on outside of the studio that's not music related.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes like, you know, bringing in analogies or like kind of like shifting like the subject to something that like they might be like super passionate about that's not the music that we're working on, and then kind of like coming back to it, and then, you know, they have the space to be like, oh yeah, like I actually was thinking it could be cool, you know, if we try this.
Yeah.
You know, and just not being afraid to do the dig.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
I think
trying to give a little bit of like basically trying to get them to like zoom out, you know?
Yeah. Getting them to do the Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really funny that like as a producer, music is a kind of a third of the job, and it's like a lot of it's like music, great, awesome, but then you also have like the entrepreneurial side where you have to like make your own business and all that kind of stuff. But then the part that I actually think gets talked about the least is the psychological side of it, of having to like manage people and handle bands and artists and all that stuff. That's actually, I think, the part that starts to elevate you into, you know, being a super well-rounded producer.
Totally feel that.
Oh yeah, if I'm tracking in Cubase, if I'm tracking a vocalist in Cubase, I try not to tune while they're around, because whenever
100%.
you audition the notes,
It sounds really weird.
it makes great vocalists sound terrible. And I remember one time I was working with this super, super timid vocalist who like barely wanted to sing in front of me. And I finally got them singing, you know. We had to have the soft talk about like, you know, if I don't hear you mess up, we won't be able to hear what's really good, you know?
Yeah.
And like right after that, I'm tuning and she was like, do I have to hear that?
Yeah. I never do vocal tuning in front of the artist.
Yeah, it never dawned on me that might
be a thing.
And now I'm like hyper conscious of it. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah,
I try to protect the artist from that kind of stuff as much as possible.
Yeah,
from the nitty gritty of the process.
Yeah, and I think like there are certain artists where, you know, you build the rapport with them where you know that they're going to like, they understand the process and they want to be part of like the comp, because they have a take on like, you know, how their vocal is supposed to feel to them. And then, you know, sometimes you have the artists where like you learn enough about them from doing it where you get to the point where you're like, I know the texture that you like in your voice. I know the shapes that you want to hear. Like, I'll, take 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever, like, give yourself a little break, and I'll go through it and then kind of get them in and get notes on it. But I try to, like, give as much give them as much space so that they can come back and have perspective on it, where like they can listen to it like music, not like, here I am, like doing like some sort of like human AI, like data analysis of the performances, and just hear the whole thing like as a song.
100%.
Yeah, I think one of the most frustrating things is whenever you hear something really good and like you're tracking like a backing vocal or a harmony or something like that, and you hear something that's really good and the artist is just insistent, they're like, it's terrible, and then you just have to go, trust me. That I feel like that's like one of the worst responses you could possibly give somebody. And then you're able to do it, let them hear it, get their opinion on it, and see if it's cool. But there's a lot of moments like that where I wish that some things were a little bit more instantaneous in the process.
Instantaneous in what sense?
Like whether it's mixing or production wise, when you're tracking something that's a little off the wall that is going to be really, really cool once you get it finished, and because I feel like all those little moments kind of add a little bit more uncertainty in the artist's head,
Yeah.
And it just kind of feels like,
especially in younger artists,
especially with younger artists, which I work with primarily
90% of the time.
I'm not really working with seasoned professionals, so.
But that's cool too. I mean, there's something about that where you don't have like the baggage of having done, a number of records and whatever the expectations were that were attached to those that may or may not have happened. When somebody's fresh, it can be a bit more of a blank canvas, which can be great.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's something that must be really, really challenging, is whenever you have the people who've been doing this for years, and there is success and there is money and all that stuff, and then they're like, oh my gosh, like it's like they're competing with their own identity in a way.
Especially some of these larger artists that have like employees relying on the success of a record.
Yeah.
Like literal multiple tens of employees relying on this record doing at least great.
Yeah.
That's stressful for everybody.
Yeah. I think the more that you can keep the artist in the mindset of just, is it something that they love, and not let the external pressures that are inevitably outside of the studio start to like creep in. I try to really like have like, when we close the door to the studio, like this is a haven for the artist's creativity. Like the thought, and it comes up for everybody at every stage of just like, is this going to be marketable? How are we going to, put this? And it's just like, well, time out. We're making the art right now, and finding a way for them to kind of get back to it and not think about the label and, manager and what people are going to think, and just be in the moment, be present, and make something that they love.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to talk about some of the gear that you have, just kind of taking a turn into more of like the technical aspect of it. You have a great studio setup. I've checked out pictures of it, and
thanks,
awesome, spot. What's a piece that you're like really proud of, or like super that makes you like, when you got it, you got like the butterflies again or something?
I got a Stam Child, which I'm really, really stoked on.
Whoa.
That was
That's
a big
sick.
one for me.
That's sick.
Because that was always like a holy grail compressor for me. And, I've had the privilege to use a couple like original Fairchilds. And once I did, I was like, wow, I really ruined myself, because there's no way that I'm ever going to have the funds and be able to acquire one of these. And then, Josh, who has Stam Audio, came out with like the Stam Child, and I put in my pre-order and waited the 6 to 8 months or whatever it is for it, and it was 110% worth it.
Oh, heck
Awesome.
yeah, dude.
Do you what is your favorite application for it?
I use it on my mix bus.
Whole mix.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But
Yeah,
I also use it on vocals a lot.
Oh,
I think that
nice.
if you're doing a vocal that needs to be a bit cleaner and more transparent, it's not always the best choice, but I think for a vocal that can have a little bit of texture, it's
Yeah.
really, really beautiful. It's great on drum overheads. It's great on bass. Done acoustic guitars with it. I mean, I when I got it, I kind of just put it on everything.
Just to see what it worked on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because to me, like the Beatles the Beatles and Motown are like the two like holy grails for me, and obviously like Motown were using like the 670, and that's why the Beatles wanted Abbey Road to get those compressors, and so I feel like all of the records that I love have that sound, so I just tried putting it on everything.
I see you have a Trident
I
24.
do, yeah.
That's so have you always worked on a console? Is that a thing that you've kind of grew up doing, like came up doing, or was that a thing that you did once and you were like, I just love this workflow versus like not having a console?
It was something that I came up doing, and it always kind of felt intuitive to me in that sense. And the Trident 24s are, I think they're really like underrated console, and
Mhm.
especially for the money. Like I don't know that there's anything even close to it for the money. But when I was building out the studio, I was like looking for a board, and this one came up. There was a studio called Stratosphere in the city that was selling it, and that was a place that was owned by James Eha from Smashing Pumpkins, and Adam Schlesinger from Fountains of Wayne. And I got connected with them and was able to acquire it. But I knew that Jim Eno from Spoon had one, and they did some of the early Spoon records on it. And then like the Daft Kings, had a 65 in their studio. So I was just like, I think that for me, I knew that there were records that I loved the sound of that had been made on these consoles, and I was able to. My thought process was, if I get one of these and I don't like the way it sounds, it's on me. It's not the console.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfectly fair.
That's,
Uh,
that's
are you
definitely a
mixing
good
on
strat.
console? Or are you mixing so do you know what I mean by like mixing
Yeah.
on console? Okay, yeah. Are you mixing on console or not? Or
These
is it
days
just
I'm
on the
mixing
way
with
in?
hardware inserts.
Okay.
Um, I've gone through like a lot of different phases of my mix setup, where when I first got, the studio, I was tracking and mixing on the console, but I kind of found that I was getting enough of like the imprint of the console on the way in, because I'm not afraid to like commit to sounds and EQs, and like I'm twiddling knobs when I'm recording. Like it's not going in flat, and so I feel like I've got the sound of the Trident in there, and then when I'm going to mix, it's kind of a combination of you know doing some hardware inserts and then a lot of plugins too.
I mean, that's something that me and Josh have talked about. I think a lot of people are scared to commit on the way in, and I feel like that's where the fun stuff happens.
Yeah, yeah, I want.
Like you said, you're twisting knobs the whole time. You want that chorus to open up. So let's like make it brighter slightly. Like let's pop that high shelf up a little bit as we go into the chorus, or maybe do some different compression moves or something on like in different moments, or ride the threshold. As maybe the drummer's playing something different, or as he shifts. However, yeah,
100%.
I feel like getting in the box, we get a little bit. But we get the what ifs, you know what I mean? Like, but what if I need to like change it? I was like, don't.
Right. Or if you really don't like it, then just do it again.
Yeah, just do it again. I I don't know. I feel like that's like part of the process. You know, it's like whenever you're listening to, you know, a guitar running through this amp and this microphone and this is the chain and you get really, really excited, it's like there's no point in not committing, you know, because like that's what got you
100%.
excited, you know, and like the whole purpose of us being here is to capture that excitement, you know. And it's like, yeah, sure. Sometimes you overcook things and have to use RX. But, you know, it's like, I don't know. I think that that's kind of what makes records unique. All of my favorite records have very interesting, you know, ways of achieving sounds that were not easily reversed. So
Yeah. I mean, I think that like there are definitely like examples, like, you know, when I was just engineering, you know, like a jazz record, for example, I'm probably not going to do like the compression that I'm, you know, playing around with. But, you know, I think that we all know that there are certain genres where you kind of just are like opening up the channels and putting the mics up. But if you're making a record that's got to have a sonic imprint and you're not doing that while you're recording it, I don't know how you can know if it's the thing that you want or not because you haven't made any decision yet. Yeah. So I'm a big believer in like just go for the thing, no safety. Like when people are like, I don't know, should we get a safety? Like that's just telling me that they don't like it yet. And it's like, well, let's not get a safety. Let's get the take that you really want. Let's get the sound that you really want.
Yeah.
But I'm not doing DIs like on my guitars to like reamp them later.
It's like funny. I was about to say that.
No.
Yeah, it's
I've
like
done
you know,
it.
Yeah. I do it for editing sometimes if I'm getting it from somebody that I don't 100% trust.
Well,
there's timing, but
there's nothing worse than like painstakingly going through and like picking guitar tones and making sure that they work and they fit and they feel good, and because like that's your job as a producer, and then the mixer hits you for the DIs, and it's like that's kind of like not your job, you know. Like, like we kind of sent you like what we wanted mixed. Like that's why there's no guitar DIs.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah, I mean the best producers that I know, they get really, really annoyed when people change their vision too much.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
So, I've gotten to the point now where I used to, as I've progressed through my career, I used to ask more because I didn't necessarily trust. A lot of it was because the band was self-producing, so I didn't necessarily trust them. I always asked for it because I was like, maybe I need to fix some of this stuff. But as I've kind of progressed through my career and I'm getting stuff from better producers, or I'm working with bands that are working with great producers. I don't even care anymore. Yeah. Like all the stuff's coming in pretty great at this point, or at least like 75% there on the low end, you know?
Yes.
So like I can work with that as a mix engineer.
Totally. You know, and I mean, if there's like 1 or 2 times that it happens a year where you need to go back to somebody, they can re-record it. You know, I've reamped guitars that were already put through an amp. You know, I've set up, you know, just like a speaker in the live room, and then, you know, run the guitar, you know, or a vocal, or actually one time like a horn section, like through, you know, guitar amp, and then just put a speaker up in the room just to like have it feel like more connected to the rest of the band. Yeah. But it's like you can always do something weird to like, you know, kind of pull it back into your world.
Yeah. Me and we were talking about we were talking with a friend of ours, Aaron Pace, who does a lot of like pop rock mixing and producing stuff, and we were like, yeah, we've straight up just sang harmonies that needed to be there that weren't there, and that we just like emulated the person's voice like very, very close, and they were like, where did you get those harmonies from? Don't worry about it.
Yep. That stuff happens.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
What sounds good. That's all that matters.
Has there been any like weird things that you've been really excited about while producing records or mixing?
Any weird things?
One of my favorite ones that I saw come up was a Sansamp on vocals. Just something weird.
Oh, that's
I
a
don't
good
know.
one, Josh.
That is a good one. I put Sansamp on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I love Sansamp. That can wind up on kicks, snares, definitely on
Oh, yeah.
bass, vocals, parallel. Um, I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't really think about it.
You just do
You
stuff.
know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
don't really like aside the stuff that I do all the time is I always have like since I've got it, I always have a Fairchild and an SSL on my mix bus.
Yeah.
But aside from that, like I don't have a template.
That's
Um,
sick. I love that.
I
I love
just
that a
kind of
lot.
like respond to whatever's there and just
Hmm.
I don't like I find myself just like reaching for plugins and not really knowing what I'm doing or like why I'm reaching for it, but like there's some connection that I've made to the
Hmm.
sound and the feeling of it.
Hmm.
Um,
I
I
feel like
do
whenever you're working with a bunch of different swaths of genres as well, it's kind of hard to have a template.
super hard, and I think that that was probably one of the reasons why I shied away from it. Um, I definitely would say I do a lot of like automation of plugins, like where I'll just like automate plugins on for different sections of a song. You know, I will like automate like my if I've got room mics, I'll turn stuff on and off, try to create like different kind of textures and spaces, even like within the context of doing an organic record. Um, I love I love like outboard delays. I use like got like a full tone tape delay that I really like. I use that. I've got a couple Memory Man pedals that I really love as well. So I'll print stuff like that. Where sometimes like when if we finish tracking a part, I'll be like, okay, cool. Like you guys take five, and I'll just do a couple passes of doing some weird delay throws and have that as a stem in the track.
Hmm.
That's really neat. That's like one of my priorities, like for my next space is, like aside from monitoring and conversion and stuff like that, I really want to have a few pedals just like patched in constantly so I could run out to them. Because there's definitely something to be said about twisting knobs as opposed to clicking around,
Hmm.
Yeah. I try to do that with like as much as I can with plugins too. It's
Hmm.
hard. It's not as fun, but I'm on like the roller mouse. I
Mm.
made the switch a few
Oh,
years ago, and
yeah.
I was definitely late to the party. But like once I made that switch, it changed my life and saved my wrist.
Yeah.
Um, but I'll just try to do like random kind of like rides even within the plugins as
I
much as I
really
can.
want like a fader port or some sort of controller for that reason. Like I really like doing writing sends. That's like a thing for me lately. Like has
Yeah,
been really fun is like I'll do a pass on a lead vocal and I'll have like a wacky bus where I'm like this just kind of sounds cool. Let's just like throw it in some places and then I'll delete the automation where I don't like it.
yeah.
And like doing it with a mouse is like really hard. And so like having that like physical touch fit, like I really want to try to get something like that where I can try roll. I do not have a roller ball. I just have a magic mouse because I'm a plebe. But also,
Dude, you
uh,
should try it. It changed my life, honestly.
I yeah, we use one at the studio. I'm fine with using it. It's just I don't know. This in a bag is like because I travel a lot for productions too. This is extremely convenient versus a rollerball.
I've actually never used like the actual big trackball. I was
The
on
red one.
I was on a thumb, like the Logitech MX Ergo. I was on that for years. And then when I started working with Lee, I was upset at how much faster he was than me. And he uses a gaming mouse. And so I bought a gaming mouse because my
Yeah,
brother, who's extremely good at CSGO, yelled at me and told me that I was using my mouse wrong and you're not supposed to use your wrist. So then I
yeah.
stopped using my wrist. and it's been fine, but I'm sure the next time that like I have to edit a full album of drums here shortly, and whenever I do that, I'm gonna be digging out the trackball again, or the thumb trackball again.
I'm a big believer. I would actually say it's like one of the most important pieces of gear for me. I have two. I have one in my go bag. So like, you know, if I'm going to do something, like I've got, you know, an Apollo and a laptop and like 7B, couple cables and that, because like I can't work without it. And
I think I might have to pick one up.
You know,
You've
I
sold me
remember
on
like
trying it.
I was probably like 2018. I was in a studio in LA and I got out there and like they had it and they didn't have like, you know, what I was used to, just like the regular Apple mouse. And I was like, I'm screwed, because they just like brought me out here to do this record and like I don't know what I'm doing with this mouse. And I just was like, Ben, focus, you got this. And just like 2 hours just like, you know, trying to make it work. And then like by day 2 I was like, oh, I get it. It like ordered one and had it in the studio when I got back to Brooklyn and haven't gone back.
It's also a really nice it's a really nice way to save space because it doesn't move.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Especially when you have a desk.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of unnecessary when you have a desk.
Yeah. 100%.
Because you just don't have the space to move the mouse around. You have to have something stationary.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I love talking about, because like you use your mouse and keyboard way more than anything else.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's like such an important piece of gear. Like, why aren't like people geeking out over that stuff more?
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, it's like I went through so many different mice just to like find one that made sense with my hand. I ended up on a SteelSeries Prime, because a lot of the gaming mice are kind of small and made to be like kind of like held like this,
Grippy. Yeah.
and those suck. Those are really bad for your hands, man. And like it's basically like what the Magic Mouse is like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not great for your hands.
Yeah, it's like that. And then I've always wanted to try out a vertical mouse, but I've been way too scared just because they look intimidating.
Yeah.
They do look terrifying.
But I've
They
heard
look
great
out of
things about
sci-fi
that, but it
movie.
makes sense, you know, because you're not, if you reach your hand out like naturally, you aren't going to be like perfectly palm down. So
True. I would love to hear, Ben, as we kind of start closing this out, maybe some records that you've worked on recently that you're like really stoked on, and then maybe some stuff that you're just listening to that you're really stoked on.
Cool. In what order? Let's do stuff I'm listening to.
Yeah. Okay. Stuff you're listening to right now.
I
It's just
love
pumping
the
you
new
up.
Claro that just came out on like last Friday. I love the new Red Clay Strays that just came out. Both those singles I think are just fantastic, great tunes in my humble opinion, beautiful recordings. What else am I into right now? I really like the new Catfish and the Bottlemen stuff. I don't know if you've listened to that. Dave
No, I've
Sardi
not
did
listened
that.
to
Dave Sardi is amazing, one of my favorites, but really, really just great sounding record. What else? Maya Hawke, from people might know from Stranger Things. She has an artist project, and
her stuff
incredible.
is so good, man. It's got a very cool, almost like nostalgic, natural sound to it. Even her voice kind of has that sound to it.
Yeah, she's incredible, and I feel like sometimes she gets overlooked because people think of her and her acting career, but I think she's just a brilliant artist. So those would be some that come to mind.
Have you listened to the DJO stuff? Speaking of people that from Stranger Things,
I have, yeah.
Yeah. It's actually really cool. It's actually really cool. I didn't know. It actually doesn't make sense why that's popular, outside of the fact that he's from Stranger Things. It's
because
really
it
good.
rips.
It's awesome. It's great music. It doesn't fit in the like what I would. It was a left turn for me from what I would expect to do really well in the general zeitgeist of normal people listening to music.
Me too. It came up as a reference for me actually last month, where there was an artist I was working with, and she was like playing for me. I was like, damn, this is really sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve,
It,
what are
Yeah.
you doing here?
Yeah.
well, first of all, I didn't know that was like Joe's project. And it kept coming up, and like we were driving a lot between Atlanta and Pittsburgh. And so I checked the credits the one day that it came up, and I was on a long drive. Because I was like, who did this? Because, like, first of all, people don't write songs like this anymore. That's
No.
really
Yeah.
cool. And the 80s thing has been big for a minute, but I feel like nobody's actually done it in a way that sounds like the 80s. And that is pretty close. And I pulled it up. I saw that Joe Curie, like, it's him. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's crazy. That makes no sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
Sounds way more 80s than all the music made for Stranger Things. And then Adam, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's Thein. I think it's Tyne. He's actually in one of the Discords that I'm in. And he produced that whole album. And I was like, that's super, super sick. And so I have yet to really pick his brain about it. But that was really crazy. And then the fact that it blew up 2 years after it came out is extremely puzzling. But I don't know. It gets me excited because
I think he dropped a B-sides record, and one of those songs is one of the ones that like really popped off. And then, because I think that's what he dropped like recently, and that one of those really popped off. I think it was a short form song thing, and but it made literally the other 2 records of his catalog blow up like crazy.
that's
I
super
think
sick.
that's a really important thing to talk about and to touch upon, actually.
Yeah, would love to.
Is just, for new artists, the importance of having a catalog of music out there. And I think that, here's my soapbox for you.
Okay.
Everybody's like, new artist, like put out a single. And really what you're doing on a certain level when you're doing that is you're promoting Spotify, because you're telling all of your friends and family and fans, go listen to Spotify, and you've got one song out, and what does Spotify do after that? They grab you, and they're going to bump you to something else that they think is going to keep you, according to the data, on their platform. And I think that that's like one of, like what we're talking about here. It's like, just put out music and don't worry about it. Keep going with it. And then, because you never know what's the song that's going to connect.
Yeah.
Do you want to have like 20 unreleased songs on your hard drive, or have 20 songs out, so that when you do have that one song that connects with people and is a moment, that then they can go and discover more about who you are as an artist and more of your music.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about this probably like 2 days ago. People were talking about like the state of the world and what actually gets artists signed and how artists grow and all that. And there's an artist I really like called Medium Build. And my buddy showed him to me spring of last year. And whenever I first found him, he had one song that I really, really loved. It's called Never Learned to Dance. But then he had like an EP and tons of singles out.
Bunch of live stuff, I think, too.
In a bunch of live stuff. And so I was able to listen to this song and really like it, and then sift through his other songs, and they were just kind of like, okay, if I'm being honest. There were probably like 4 incredibly good songs. But because of those 4 incredibly good songs, he was getting offered bigger tours. He signed a record deal, and he gained, just like when I followed him on Instagram, he had 10,000 followers. And I remember thinking that, I was like, man, this guy's so good, and he only has 10K. And then I checked the other day, and he has over 80,000 in a year.
Wow.
And it's insane to me that like so many people are afraid of releasing music, because if he didn't release all of those bad songs from 2019, well, they weren't bad. Like objectively, like they were pretty good. They just weren't my thing.
Yeah.
But if he didn't do that, and if he didn't keep releasing music, then if you do have that one good song, there's nothing that's going to keep somebody listening, because there's nothing else out there for them to listen to.
It's really funny. This conversation is, and I think the music industry tends to lag behind a lot of other industries. And this is a conversation that, so I try to have a really good like semblance of a bunch of different industries, because I feel like it informs what the music industry will do in probably 2 to 3 years.
Yes.
So you know who has
Yeah.
this conversation every time?
Everybody in
YouTubers.
tech.
YouTubers, 100%. They are like, you need to put out 50 videos and then make the video that you think is going to blow up. Because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to blow up on your first video. You don't want to blow up on your first song. It's the same idea, right? Because you want to have a back catalog of people to now go, they find your video, they go, oh, I like this person. Now I'm going to go back through all of their videos and like learn more about them. Oh, he did this. That's really interesting. Like you want to blow up 2 albums into your career as a musician because you want people to be like, oh, and he's got 2 other records. Oh, they've got a live record and maybe an EP, handful of other random singles and some collabs. Like that's awesome. There's so much here that I can just live in with this artist now.
100%.
It's
100%.
wild to me that artists aren't thinking that way.
Yeah. That's happening to Mickey right now. Is he just dropped that incredible album, and it's like the only thing I've listened to for months. And then I started going through like his backlog, and the music's a lot different, but there's a lot of really good songs on there, and I'm really happy that he's been releasing music for a few years instead of dropping one good single and then dipping, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like there's definitely like one of the things that I dealt with as an artist coming up was, you know, you compare yourself to your heroes and you look at like their trajectory as far as like, where were they on record 1? Where were they on record 2, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, if you're doing that, you're doing yourself a disservice, because if they were doing it today, they would inevitably do something like completely different. And I think that like your point of like, you don't want to blow up on like your first single. If you can blow up when you already have like 20 songs out there, you're going to be in a better place for like having a career that lasts.
100%. Even just monetarily, like if you get a fan off of one song and they're like, I love this artist, I'm going to binge all of their stuff consistently. You're not streaming off of, obviously streaming already pays so little.
Yeah.
But streaming off of one song versus 30 songs is like way better. You know what I mean?
Well, that's why artists are putting out 27, 30 song albums.
Exactly.
You know, it's like if you can bump 30 seconds and then move to the next song and they can get, you know, 30 streams as opposed to 10 streams, well, it's better monetarily and it's better for their chart position.
And it's better for us because then we have more albums to produce.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I really do love. I've been mixing a lot of EPs and albums lately, and I mastered an album recently, and it's been just really fun to be in like a longer like process with artists lately.
It's the best.
Instead of single. Yeah.
It's the best. I'm really excited about that, and that like people are interested in that, because I think that it's really good for creativity.
Oh, I had this like I don't know if it's just because like I pay more attention to maybe albums that have no shot at getting on the radio, but I kind of had this thought the other day that it feels like album tracks are back. I feel like they disappeared for a long time, and it was really just because everybody was just writing to try to get on the radio. But I love album tracks. I really do. They're like the best parts of albums to me. I mean, that's why it's an album track.
Yeah.
But or writing for like playlists where you're thinking about like what is like the Spotify single as opposed to like what is the radio single. But now it's like, you know, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's like on the publishing and sync licensing side earlier today, and we were just talking about like how, you know, it's the album tracks. It could be track 9 that gets that placement in the television show or the end credits in a film that all of a sudden puts an artist on the map. And, you know, it's just like, you never know. That's why you got to just make music, make art that you love, and let people connect with it if they connect with it.
100%. Ben, thank you so much for being on this episode with us, man. If people want to find you or check you out, like, where can they go?
benriceproductions.com. I'm on Instagram, Ben Rice Music. My email, I don't know, dude, should I give it out? Should I not give it out?
You can if you want. That's up to you. Do you want spam?
You can find it on my website, but I'm out there. I'm accessible.
Yeah.
And,
we actually have a rule where all of our
listeners
have to email somebody if they drop their email. So it's a good thing I just chose not to do that.
Cool.
So,
dude, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and hanging out with us today, man. It's been such a great conversation.
Dude, it's my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah,
thank you.
Josh, thanks again for being here.
Anytime.
And listeners, thank you so much for listening. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one later.
Cool. See you guys.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast. If you could take the time to like, subscribe. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other audio platform, go ahead and make sure you're subscribed, and also leave a rating and a review. It helps the show get out to new people, and we're trying to grow every single week. Once again, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast, and we'll see you next week.